When I tell people that I grew up in a family of 10 kids, oftentimes they will say, what? And then when I say, and here's the other part, there were 6 boys. We were all born in Ottawa, and then mom and dad moved to Edmonton, where my 4 sisters were born. And then when they pick themselves off the floor, there's a couple of questions I always get. One is, are you Mormon or Catholic? And then another one I often get is your mom alive? Catholic? And yes, mom and dad are still alive and kicking up in Edmonton. When I tell stories about my dad, and you get to meet him, you know those stories, but when I tell stories about my mom, oftentimes those stories are around religion and around arguing, because my mom is a very religious person. So we argued a lot. Day after day, year after year, we would argue. And we would argue about religion. And we would argue about the length of my hair. And we would argue about religion. And we would argue about the music I was listening to. And then we would argue about religion. And then we would argue about the women I was dating and whether their pants were too tight. And then we would argue about religion. Now, these arguments would stretch into the night. They would stretch over the week. And they would stretch across the country when I finally moved away. My mom was and is relentless. I would sometimes tell the story that I used to be on television every day. I was on television every day for 12 years. And my mom never saw me once because mom didn't have a TV. And she believed TV was the devil's work. Thank you very much. Or I tell the story sometimes that my mom refused to come to our wedding because she couldn't accept the fact that I was divorced. Now, you've all heard the stories or the joke where they say, you know, when you're a little kid, you think your parents are God. And then when you are a teenager, you think your parents are knuckleheads. And then when you're in your 20s, you just ignore them. And then if it ever happens that one day you have a kid of your own, all you want to do is phone them and apologize. But for me, it was never that simple. I mean, sometimes Blythe and I'll be in bed after an exhausting night of parenting our 2 amazing kids, and I'll turn to Blythe and I'll say, my mom and dad had 5 times this many kids. But Mr. Rogers reminds us to think of the people who loved us into being, who only wanted what was best for us, the ones who wanted us to do our best. And so tonight I thought maybe I should tell a different story about my mom, because she deserves better. And she's not here, she's in Edmonton, so she won't hear it, but maybe someday she will. Now, my mom, if you met her, you would see that she does a lot of things the same way over and over. And if you would ever come to our house over the 40 years that mom and dad had kids living there, you would have seen some patterns. Like lunchtime was Campbell's soup out of the can and white bread sandwiches cut diagonally. Every lunch for 40 years. Supper was fish on Friday, hot dogs or hamburgers on Saturday, roast beef on Sunday, and Monday was leftovers. For 40 years. And if you'd ever went over to our house late at night when the kids were all in bed and mom was just getting into bed, and you went down to the kitchen where the big kitchen table was, you would have seen a banquet set for 10. A banquet sponsored by Kellogg's, because mom would have put out a whole pile of cereal boxes, and then at every setting would be a bowl and a plate and a spoon and a knife and a cup and bread and the toaster, jam, peanut butter and butter, all set out, because mom learned that if you do that the night before, it makes the morning just a little more calm. My mom also, as you can imagine, had a lot of laundry to deal with. and she used to do a lot of ironing. And at a certain point, maybe desperation, she taught me how to iron a shirt. Now, a lot of people, when they iron a shirt, they just sort of throw it down and bludgeon it with the iron, hoping the wrinkles go away. But that was never Mom's way. Mom did it right. She had a system, and there was an order. And I learned that you did the little panel behind the collar first, and then you did the collar flat, and then you folded the collar and you ironed that. And then you did one sleeve and you ironed that, and then you did the other sleeve, you ironed that, and then you started on the button side. You went up the button side and you went the shirt, moved it around until you got to the non-button side, you ironed that, and then you took that shirt and you put it on the hanger. Now here was the important thing. What you did is you held the hanger in your teeth and you buttoned the top button. That way the collar would keep its shape and you hung it up. And then you did the next shirt and the next shirt for 60 years. My mom loved me into being. And she did. That mom of mine loved me into being when she was pregnant and or holding an infant for 22 straight years. My mom loved me into being when we moved from Ottawa across the country to Edmonton and left her friends, left her family, and left her support group and moved to a city where she knew no one. She loved me into being when she was trying to make sense of a world that seemed to have lost its mind and she was just trying to hang on to her own. And if you'd asked me then, what's love? I would have said, love is complicated. And love is exhausting, and love is controlling, and love won't let go, and love runs away, and love is angry. But tonight, a little later on, I think I have a better idea. Because when this show ends, Blythe and our kids, Johnny and Tess, will go home. And they'll leave a bit earlier than me because, we'll have to pack up. And when I get home, chances are they'll be asleep and the house will be quiet. And I'll go into the kitchen and I'll do what I've done every night for years. I'll put out a bowl and a spoon and a cup and some cereal for Tess. And I'll put out a plate and a knife and the bread and peanut butter for John. And then I'll put 2 latte cups out, and I'll make sure the coffee machine is ready and clean. And I'll stand there, and it'll feel good. And then I'm going to walk into our bedroom, and I'll take off this suit, and I'll hang it up in our closet. And I'll hang it up right beside a row of shirts, all ironed, with the top button done up. And I'll think of my mom, this woman who loved me into being. This woman who taught me that it's important to do it right, that it's important to finish, that it's important to prepare, and to never, ever give up on what you think is right. And so tonight, with all of us here, I can say that love carries on. Love shows up in the strangest of places. Love is beautiful, and even if it takes a long time, and even if it hurts, love is worth it. That's from Mom.